Welcome to Time to Press Pause, a podcast for CEOs by CEOs. I'm your host, Ellen Williams, CEO of the Salient Strategist, and today I'm speaking with Jeremy Goldman. Jeremy is the former founder and CEO of Firebrand Group, an award-winning digital marketing firm acclaimed for its innovative strategies. His clientele included industry giants such as Unilever, L'Oreal, Consumer Reports, the U.S. Marine Corps, and Movado. He is the author of the best-selling book, Going Social: Excite Customers, Generate Buzz, and Energize Your Brand with the Power of Social Media, and co-author of Getting to Like. Jeremy is currently Senior Director, Marketing, Commerce, and Tech Briefings at eMarketer. Welcome, Jeremy, to Time to Press Pause. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited to be with you.
Thank you. Jeremy, you and I have known each other for maybe 10 years now. I think we
Something
met
like
back
that,
in my
yeah.
marketing days, which are, I'd like to say, are behind me, but as launching a new business, they're very much in front of me. And either
I,
way, I'm excited to hear your story. You and I spoke recently to reconnect, which was wonderful. And now I get to hear your Press Pause story.
well, thank you. And first off, I would just say I think we're all marketers to some degree, even when we're not.
True.
So I think just to get that out the way, but just to tell my press pause story, there was, like a moment. I think that I like to move full steam ahead all the time. I was running a small agency called Firebrand Group that I had started years before. I ran it for like 7 years, and I'd started it right around when my first book was coming out, and I was on a brand that was launching that needed, FDA approval. Like it needed some approvals and it couldn't get it. So I'm like launching a book for how to, tie social media success to business metrics at a time when like my business, we were starting for Unilever, couldn't actually launch. And that was very frustrating. So I'm like, let's start an agency because I can help other people with the advice that I'm, putting it forward in the book. And it made a lot of sense for me. And, you just start helping people, you take on custom projects. Younger me didn't realize, well, that doesn't necessarily scale as much. You work really hard and it's very enjoyable and you help a lot of people. But at the same time, if you want to build like a defensible, future-proof business, then it's a little bit harder to do that way, right? Eventually, then I came to the conclusion, well, I should essentially press pause on that entrepreneurial career, where I was a founder and CEO and figure out what to do next. And then I think that part of the issue was figuring out what to do with a company. Do you just fold it? Do you sell it, for parts? It wound up being like the creative director wanted to take it on along with some other people who helped, buy me out. So I sold it. But then I had to actually kind of press pause and figure out what I wanted to do next. And, like, do you just start something new? And I don't think I was necessarily burned out per se, but I figured, well, it makes sense to figure out what I want to do. And in the last year or so of running Firebrand Group, I was trying to turn it into a bit more of a company based stuff of data. And, again, something that was a little bit more of a scalable project or product that you could sell, the same thing to a lot of different people instead of a totally different thing to, all these different people. And I had to really press pause and figure out where I would be best served, where would be the best place for me to go next. And I looked at a whole lot of different industries. And then ultimately I kind of said, well, I was trying to basically advise people as if we were a market research firm that took on these custom consulting projects. That's where I was trying to bring the company to eventually. And why don't I try to join a company like that? I can learn from them. I can, have a degree of humility of instead of like having to be the person all the time, like the presenter the person to make all the P&L decisions, this main focal point of the company. Instead, like let's accept the fact that there are a lot of other people out there that I can learn from. I think that wasn't really so hard for me to do as a CEO. It was more so convincing other people that I wanted to learn from somebody else. I think that there's a lot of people who think like, oh, you're just going to start something new immediately, or you're going to join this company, and then you're going to leave because you want to be an entrepreneur all the time. You want to be in charge all the time. I actually found that it was pretty difficult to find somebody who would have me, who believed me that I just actually wanted to be like a cog and be part of, like a greater collective. So it was an interesting thing. I never really thought of having leadership qualities and being able to run something and start something and bootstrap it and everything could be a negative. But I actually very much found that it was being able to kind of press pause and figure out where I should go next and what company would have me was, I think, like a big part of what I did next, which I wound up at eMarketer and an analyst role that probably wasn't like the perfect fit for me, but was able to get by with that role for a bit, and then they kind of created a role for me that I think I've taken on more responsibility for a few consecutive years, and it feels so perfect for me to the point that if I'm working at 10 o'clock at night, I'm doing it because I want to, and nobody is asking me to do it. I don't think even everybody knows that I ran something and started it and grew it into something, and that's okay. There are good things about having that skill set, but it's interesting how they can also be held against you by the broader market. That was some of, that I found surprising, I guess you could say, about that journey.
That is surprising. You would think that leadership skills would be something of interest to other organizations.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like preaching to the choir that regard. But I mean, if I was putting myself in somebody else's shoes, and you know this because you've hired that sometimes it's all about fit, and you might have somebody who is good, but then you worry, well, are they going to be, if they have leadership skills, am I looking at them for a role where they're going to be able to flex those skills enough, right? And actually, I did not have to flex my skills whatsoever in if from a leadership standpoint in my initial role, at eMarketer when they hired me. And in fairness, I think they realized, well, this is somebody who has a particular skill. You should be tapping it in the same way that when I was running a smaller agency, it kind of behooved me to like all you have is your human, personnel. So you have to tap and squeeze as much of that as possible. You have to find people who are diamonds in the rough, who are underutilized, who have a skill that like you can actually grow the business if you tap into more, and you really have to kind of squeeze in a positive, pro-social way, and make people feel very engaged. And I think that you know it's very helpful to have any of these skills that I think you get a lot of skills out of being a CEO, but then what are the ones that you want to lean into in the future, And in some ways, I think when you're a CEO, especially of a smaller business, there are all these other people who have power who you're working with. So in some degree, nobody's ever 100% in charge. But I did want to be less in charge for a number of different reasons. And I think one of them was just because people aren't always trying to teach you when you're the person in charge. And I always want to learn. I think we should always try to learn. None of us are finished products until the day we die. And then you are a finished product, like by definition. So why not keep on, growing? And I think the best way to do that is a company that's devoted to knowledge. So that was part of like how I wound up where I am now.
That's an amazing point, and I think you're right on. People don't always think about teaching a CEO. In many cases, CEOs are looked at as the one who has all the answers, but we know nobody really has all the answers, right?
I mean, of course, it's interesting how depending on the type of company that you run, there's this pressure to act as if you know everything. And, for instance, you're hiring a small agency under the belief that there are so many different answers that you're going to get from this person. Why would I hire this person if they don't know everything? I want to hire the smartest person around. And I think, I work with actually somebody who I work who sticks out because they pointedly point out that they don't know everything. And that's somebody who goes out of their way to acknowledge that. And I think in doing so, like they're younger than us, but that's a really good skill to have, to be able to say, I don't know everything, because as a result, they speak to a lot of people that they can grow from. And I think that that growth trajectory for that individual is generally going to be better. Like maybe there are some people who along the way are, put off by the fact that you don't know everything. But I think that there are a lot of people who are also drawn to that kind of persona too.
I agree. One of the interviews I did, one of the pieces of advice was to ask for advice, because the people you're asking for to give you advice will feel good about themselves because they've been asked for their advice. And at the same time, you're getting to learn from someone who's willing to give advice. Based on the story you just said, do you see that as more generational? Because I was brought up, get a job, do your job, go through the ranks, and if you're at the top, you know it all. But do you see a different generation has a different approach?
I think if anything, I mean, I think there's a generational, I know everything, and, grown-ups and older people are stupid. I think that there's a little bit of because I study demographics, and I'm very much, that's a broad strokes analysis, but there is a little bit of less desire to learn if I had to, like, broad strokes, like an entire, like everybody in their 20s, which is, there's so many different cohorts within that. So it's unfair to do that. But I would say that there are companies for sure. There are different, like, cultural differences, especially like a lot of the work that I've done is global. And I noticed that there are different kinds of, like, humility plays better in certain markets than it does in the US. And like I said, different companies have different cultures where admitting that you don't know everything is encouraged and is not frowned upon. And then there are places where it's like, do you really want to admit that you don't have all the answers, right? So it's all about, like, what are the traits that wind up getting ahead? Because then those people tend to look for lookalikes, and then pretty soon you have a certain culture.
I think that makes sense. Not necessarily generational, but cultural within an organization. Do you have any advice for CEOs as to how they can identify when it might be time to press pause?
I think one of the biggest things is that there are very few CEOs where they say, like, oh, I have such a relaxed life and I'm, like, I'm moving very slowly and deliberately all the time. Often it's like you're triaging and there are 40 different decisions to make. And, there was, like, towards the time of being a CEO day to day where I needed to think about my future, and I knew that this deal was at hand, to exit. And I was still so busy with, like, day-to-day stuff, I wasn't thinking enough about pressing pause. And I think it is important, especially when you have to make a very deliberate decision about your life or about a major, decision tied to the company, or a major thing that you're thinking about, a key project, to deliberately, like, acknowledge the fact that this is something where I have to block out all the voices and everything else and then just focus on this one thing. And I think that's very difficult for people when they are moving full steam ahead. So for me, it was a matter of, I have to clear all these other things off my plate in order to make a major decision about my future, because I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere while I was still dealing with the day to day, like, in the mire. So I think with, if you're still in the business and not exiting, then you really have to be very mindful and deliberate and say, like, okay, nothing else is, and sometimes that might be like, I'm not even going to listen to music. I'm not even going to be, like, talking to my family this night. That's part of why people have, like, retreats, right? It's expensive to get people together for, like, 2 days in a different location, but there's a reason why you're pressing pause on the way that things are, happening on a daily basis, in order to have a different experience, to force your mind to a different place. And, for CEOs, that's incredibly valuable if you can inhabit that other mind space for even a little bit.
Inhabit that other mind space. It's a great way of putting it. I love your story. Really insightful. And thank you so much for sharing. And always great advice. I always enjoy speaking with you. And I'm thrilled that you had the time to spend with me here on Time to Press Pause.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. Great questions.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Time to Press Pause. To read Jeremy's content, go to eMarketer.com. To learn more about me, go to thesalientstrategist.com. And be sure to join us again wherever you listen to your podcasts.